The last piece of turkey sat cold and congealed on my plate when I heard Sterling's BMW pull out of my driveway at exactly 6 a.m. on Christmas morning. Through the kitchen window, I watched my ex-husband load ski equipment into his car while my 3 adult children, Quentin, Peyton, and Sloane, climbed eagerly into the back seat with their expensive winter gear and matching luggage sets. Blair Ashford, Sterling's 45-year-old girlfriend, sat in the passenger seat wearing a designer ski outfit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She laughed at something Sterling said, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his arm as he adjusted the rearview mirror. I stood at the kitchen sink in my worn bathrobe, holding a cup of reheated coffee, watching my family drive away to spend Christmas at a luxury resort in Aspen, without me. "Mom, you know you can't ski," Quentin had explained 2 weeks earlier when they announced their holiday plans. "Your arthritis would never handle the slopes. And honestly, it would just be awkward with Blair there. You understand, right? Besides," Peyton had added with the casual cruelty that came so naturally to my middle child, "you just slow everyone down. This is supposed to be a fun, active vacation. We'll see you when we get back," Sloane had promised, already scrolling through resort websites on her phone. "Maybe we can do a late Christmas dinner or something." A late Christmas dinner or something. As if 43 years of my life spent creating magical Christmas mornings for them could be dismissed with such careless indifference. I had raised 3 children who now saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient obligation. A 70-year-old divorced woman who couldn't keep up with their affluent lifestyles and would only embarrass them in front of their father's glamorous new girlfriend. The house felt cavernously empty without the chaos of Christmas morning that had defined my adult life for over 4 decades. No excited voices. No rustling wrapping paper. No children's laughter echoing through rooms that now held only the ghosts of family traditions that had died along with my marriage. I spent the day doing what lonely people do on Christmas. I cleaned a house that was already clean. I watched holiday movies that made me cry. I ate leftover turkey that tasted like disappointment. I called my sister in Phoenix, but she was busy hosting her own family gathering and could only talk for 10 minutes before rushing off to check the prime rib. "Why don't you come visit us next year?" she suggested with the kind of vague politeness that meant she was already thinking about hanging up. "We'd love to have you," but we both knew she wouldn't follow through on that invitation. And I wouldn't have the courage to take her up on it anyway. By evening, I was sitting in Sterling's old recliner, the one piece of furniture he'd left behind because it didn't match Blair's modern aesthetic, wearing the same bathrobe I'd worn all day, wondering when exactly I had become the kind of person whose own children found excuses to avoid spending holidays with her. The divorce 5 years ago had changed everything between my children and me. Not immediately, but gradually, like a slow leak that eventually drains all the water from a pool. Sterling's departure had somehow diminished my value in their eyes, as if being abandoned by their father revealed some fundamental inadequacy they'd never noticed before. Or maybe they had always seen me as boring and burdensome, and marriage to their successful, charismatic father had simply disguised their true feelings about their ordinary, unglamorous mother. Sterling Carmichael had been 57 when he announced he was leaving our 38-year marriage for his assistant. "I need to feel alive again," he'd explained, using the kind of self-serving psychology men employed to justify devastating their families. "Blair makes me feel young and energetic in ways I'd forgotten were possible." What he really meant was that Blair was 23 years younger than me, had perky breasts and no arthritis, and didn't remind him daily that he was approaching 70 with nothing to show for his life except a moderately successful insurance agency and 3 adult children who called only when they needed money. The settlement had been fair, but not generous. Enough to maintain my modest lifestyle, not enough to compete with Sterling's newfound prosperity or Blair's expensive tastes. While I clipped coupons and bought generic groceries, Sterling took his new family on European vacations and ski trips to Aspen. And my children, who had grown up comfortably middle class, had clearly decided that prosperity was more appealing than loyalty. At 11 p.m., I was about to turn off the Christmas tree lights and go to bed when someone knocked on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw 3 men in dark suits standing on my porch beneath the yellow glow of the porch light. They looked official. Serious. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if something terrible had happened to my family on their drive to Colorado. "Mrs. Carmichael?" the tallest man asked when I opened the door. He was probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested expensive education and significant professional success. "Yes, that's me," I said. "Is everything all right? Has something happened to my family?" "No, ma'am. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and these are my colleagues David Chan and Marcus Rodriguez. We're attorneys with Goldman Lux. We've been trying to reach you regarding an urgent matter involving your father's estate." "My father?" I stared at him. "My father died when I was 2 years old. There is no estate." "There's been some confusion about your family history, Mrs. Carmichael," he said gently. "May we come in? What we need to discuss is quite complex and shouldn't be handled on your front porch." I led them into my living room, suddenly self-conscious about my bathrobe and the scattered remnants of my solitary Christmas dinner. These men looked like they belonged in corporate boardrooms and exclusive country clubs, not in my modest suburban home with its dated furniture and clearance sale decorations. "Mrs. Carmichael," Jonathan Pierce began, settling onto my sofa and opening an expensive leather briefcase, "your biological father was Archibald Thornfield, founder and CEO of Thornfield Capital Ventures." The name meant nothing to me. "He didn't die when you were 2, Pierce continued. "He abandoned your mother, but he lived until 3 months ago." "I don't understand," I said. "My mother told me he died in a car accident." "She told you that to protect you from the pain of abandonment. Archibald Thornfield was a wealthy, but emotionally unavailable man who left your mother to pursue his business interests." "Then why come now?" I asked. "Why after all these years?" "Because," Pierce said, "he never stopped monitoring your life." "Monitoring my life?" My voice shook. "He hired private investigators to track your education, your marriage, your children's achievements, and your general welfare. He never contacted you directly, but he maintained detailed knowledge of your circumstances for 65 years. "Why?" Pierce closed the briefcase. "Because 3 months ago he died, and he left everything to you." The room began to spin. My father, whom I had believed dead my entire life, had been alive, watching me, building a fortune, and somehow deciding to leave it all to the daughter he had abandoned. "Everything," I whispered. "What does everything mean exactly?" Jonathan Pierce pulled documents from his briefcase and spread them across my coffee table, carefully arranging them between the remnants of my Christmas dinner and my untouched, now cold cup of coffee. Everything about the moment felt surreal. The legal paper, the quiet professionalism, the way 3 impeccably dressed attorneys sat in my modest living room like they belonged there. "Everything," Jonathan said calmly. "Meaning $340 million. I stared at him. "Mrs. Carmichael, you've inherited one of the largest private venture capital funds in the country. Some Christmas mornings bring presents under the tree. This Christmas night brought 3 lawyers to my door and news that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and my father. A man who'd been dead to me for 65 years, but who had apparently been very much alive and very, very wealthy. And the family who had abandoned me to spend Christmas in Aspen had no idea that the boring, inconvenient mother they'd left behind had just become one of the wealthiest women in America." I sat in my living room at midnight on Christmas, staring at documents containing more zeros than I'd ever imagined could belong to a single human being, while 3 attorneys waited patiently for my shock to subside enough for coherent conversation. "Mrs. Carmichael, I know this is overwhelming," Jonathan Pierce said gently. "Please take all the time you need to process this." $340 million, I repeated, the words foreign on my tongue, as if I were speaking a language I didn't understand. "You're telling me that my father, who abandoned me when I was 2 years old, spent 65 years building a fortune that he's now leaving to me?" "Precisely. And according to his very detailed instructions," Jonathan continued, "this inheritance was to be revealed only after both his death and your 70th birthday, whichever came last." "Why?" I asked. "Why those specific conditions?" David Chan, the youngest of the 3 lawyers, consulted his notes before answering. "Mr. Thornfield wanted to ensure you lived a complete life independent of his wealth before receiving it. He believed that sudden money in youth could corrupt character development, but that financial security later in life could enhance whatever wisdom and values a person had developed naturally." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "So he was watching me," I said slowly, "for 65 years, judging my character." Comprehensive surveillance, Marcus Rodriguez confirmed, pulling out a thick, meticulously organized folder. Education records, employment history, marriage and family details, community involvement, charitable giving patterns, personal integrity assessments. My stomach tightened. The violation of privacy was staggering. And yet, beneath the discomfort, something else stirred. Curiosity. What did his surveillance conclude about my character? I asked quietly. Jonathan met my eyes. That you were exactly the kind of person he hoped his daughter would become. I swallowed. Hardworking, devoted to family, community-minded, financially responsible despite limited resources, and generous within your means. Generous within my means? I let out a short, bitter laugh. I've been clipping coupons and buying generic groceries for 5 years. What generosity could he possibly have observed? Marcus opened the folder and slid several photographs across the table. My breath caught. Pictures of me volunteering at the local food bank, tutoring children at the library, carrying casserole dishes into the homes of elderly neighbors, organizing coat drives for homeless shelters. Ordinary things I'd always thought of as basic human decency, not charity. Mr. Thornfield was particularly impressed by your volunteer work during your divorce, David added. I stiffened. During my divorce? Despite your own financial struggles and emotional trauma, he continued gently, you increased your community involvement rather than becoming self-absorbed or bitter. You have photographs of me during the worst year of my life, I said. Your father believed a person's response to adversity revealed their true character more accurately than behavior during prosperity, Marcus replied. I studied the images of myself from 5 years ago. Exhausted, hollow-eyed, holding myself together with sheer will while my world collapsed around me. Knowing someone had been watching those moments felt invasive and strangely validating. What happens now? I asked finally. Do I just become rich overnight? The transition will be gradual and carefully managed, Jonathan explained. Mr. Thornfield established a trust structure designed to help you adjust to managing substantial wealth responsibly. How gradual? $5 million will be immediately available for personal use, he said. Additional funds will be released based on your comfort level and financial planning preferences. $5 million. The number was so abstract it barely registered as real. The remainder of the inheritance will stay in trust until you determine how you want to structure your long-term financial management, Jonathan continued. Investment strategies, distribution plans, philanthropic priorities. Philanthropic priorities, I repeated. Your father assumed that someone with your demonstrated character would want to use significant wealth to benefit others, David said. But all decisions regarding causes, amounts, and timing are entirely yours. I thought about my family in Aspen, champagne glasses raised, snow-dusted mountains behind them, smiling for social media while their mother sat alone eating leftover turkey. The irony was so sharp it felt like cosmic justice. Gentlemen, I said at last, we need to talk about confidentiality. My family doesn't need to know about this, at least not yet. Jonathan nodded. Mr. Thornfield was very specific about privacy protocols. Disclosure is entirely at your discretion. You may tell anyone you choose, or no one at all. I looked up. Why would he emphasize privacy so strongly? Jonathan hesitated, then answered carefully. Because he anticipated what sudden wealth could do to your relationships, he said. He believed people should reveal their fortune only after they'd had time to understand it themselves, before others could distort it with expectations, entitlement, or manipulation. Marcus added, your father wanted this gift to protect you, not isolate you. I leaned back against the couch, the weight of it all finally settling in. For 70 years I had lived believing I'd been forgotten. Turned out I'd been watched, judged, and in his own deeply flawed way loved. Because he understood that sudden wealth often changes family dynamics in ways that aren't always beneficial. He wanted you to have time to adjust to your new circumstances before dealing with other people's expectations and potential demands. What kind of demands? David pulled out additional documentation that made my stomach churn. Mr. Thornfield's research into your family relationships indicated that your children's attentiveness to your welfare might be variable depending on their perception of your financial status. You investigated my children? Superficial background checks, Marcus Rodriguez clarified quickly. Nothing invasive. Public records. Social media activity analysis. Enough to understand general family dynamics. And what did you conclude? Marcus looked uncomfortable before answering honestly. That your children's emotional support and time investment in your welfare decreased significantly following your divorce, particularly as their father's financial situation improved through his new relationship. The assessment stung because it was accurate. Before the divorce, Quentin, Peyton, and Sloan had been attentive children who called regularly, who invited me to dinners and birthday gatherings, who included me in their lives. Afterward, I'd become the boring, financially struggling mother they visited out of obligation rather than genuine desire. The contrast had been subtle at first, then undeniable. Mr. Thornfield recommended that you observe your family's behavior for several months before making any decisions about sharing your inheritance information, Jonathan added. He believed that wealth could either reveal or corrupt character, and that you should understand people's authentic feelings before money complicated their motivations. Essentially, I said slowly, he's giving me the opportunity to test my family's character before they know I have anything to offer them. Exactly. I looked around my modest living room, the dated furniture, the clearance sale holiday decorations, the small television Sterling had left behind, and tried to imagine what my life would look like with unlimited financial resources. Gentlemen, I asked, what would you recommend as a first step for someone who's never managed substantial wealth? Education, Jonathan said immediately. Financial planning, legal consultation, tax strategy development, and most importantly time to clarify your priorities and values before making major decisions. But I could theoretically buy myself a first-class ticket to Aspen tomorrow and show up at my family's luxury resort. The three lawyers exchanged a glance that suggested they'd seen newly wealthy clients make exactly that kind of impulsive choice. You could, David confirmed carefully, but Mr. Thornfield's experience suggested that restraint and strategic thinking usually lead to better outcomes than immediate dramatic gestures, even when those gestures would be deeply satisfying. Especially then. Some people spent Christmas opening presents under the tree with loving families. I'd spent Christmas discovering that the father who'd abandoned me had spent 6 decades creating the largest gift imaginable, while my actual family abandoned me for a ski vacation. Now I had to decide whether to use my newfound wealth for immediate revenge or long-term strategy, when dealing with children who had just revealed how little they valued their mother's company. The lawyers left at 1:30 a.m. after 2 hours of explaining trust structures, tax implications, and something called wealth transition psychology, which apparently involved not making dramatic life changes for at least 90 days. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at business cards from Goldman Lux, trying to process the reality that I was no longer Carmichael, the divorced woman whose children found her too boring for Christmas vacation. I was now Carmichael, heir to a fortune that exceeded the GDP of small countries. The irony was so perfect it felt like divine intervention. On the same night my family chose luxury skiing with my ex-husband's girlfriend over Christmas with me. I'd inherited enough money to buy the resort where they were staying, and probably the entire mountain beneath it. But Jonathan Pierce's warnings about strategic thinking echoed in my mind as I made coffee and tried to imagine what revenge would actually accomplish beyond momentary satisfaction. At 8 a.m. my phone buzzed with a text from Sloan. Merry Christmas, Mom. Resort is amazing. Wish you were here. The casual cruelty of the message, wishing I were there after specifically excluding me, made me want to immediately book the most expensive suite at whatever resort they'd chosen and arrive with a fleet of personal assistants and enough jewelry to blind Blair Ashford. Instead I texted back, Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Enjoy your vacation. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in my car outside Wells Fargo, holding the debit card David Chun had given me. Access to my initial discretionary funds. $5 million available immediately, he'd said. No questions asked. The card has a daily limit of $50,000. If you need larger amounts, call our office and we'll arrange transfers within 24 hours. $50,000 per day. I'd lived on less than $30,000 a year since my divorce. I drove through the ATM and checked my balance just to see if the numbers were real. The screen displayed available balance $4,999,000. $847.23. The 53 cents represented the remaining balance from my previous account, absorbed into the new trust structure. Seeing my old life reduced to pocket change made the transformation feel complete and utterly surreal. My phone buzzed with Instagram notifications. Quentin had posted photos from Aspen, his family group seated around a long restaurant table, everyone laughing, flushed from cold air and expensive wine, wrapped in designer ski wear. Sterling had his arm draped casually around Blair, who wore what appeared to be a diamond necklace that caught the restaurant lighting and fractured it into sharp points of brilliance. The caption read, "Perfect Christmas vacation with my favorite people. Blessed Amen family. Naram Aspen." I wasn't in any of the photos, of course. For social media purposes, I simply didn't exist. Peyton had posted a video of himself skiing down what looked like an expert slope, the camera mounted somewhere on his chest as the mountain rushed past him. The caption read, "Living my best life. Some people were made for adventure. Skiing no excuses. Active lifestyle." The hashtag no excuses felt personal, as though it were a commentary on my supposed inability to keep up with their relentlessly athletic vacation plans. Sloane's post was the cruelest of all. A smiling selfie of her and Blair in white robes, mid-spa treatment, skin glowing, eyes half-lidded with pleasure. The caption read, "So grateful for family who understand self-care and living beautifully. /family. Our spa days are living my best life." The message was unmistakable. Their new family unit, Sterling, Blair, and my 3 children, represented modern, active, beautiful living. And I represented everything they had left behind. I drove to Target and bought the most expensive laptop they carried, along with professional-grade software for managing personal finances and investment portfolios. If I was going to be wealthy, I wanted to understand exactly what that meant, and how to use money strategically rather than emotionally. That evening, I spent 4 hours researching Thornfield Capital Ventures and my biological father's business empire. Archibald Thornfield had been a legend in venture capital, known for identifying and funding technology startups that later became household names. His portfolio included early stakes in companies now worth billions. But the most fascinating detail was his reputation for what business journalists called patient capital, long-term investments in people and ideas that others dismissed as too risky or unconventional. Apparently, he'd applied that same philosophy to me. He had invested 65 years of surveillance and strategic planning in a daughter he'd never met, monitoring my character development like a long-term business proposition. The psychological profile Goldman Lux had compiled painted a picture of a brilliant but emotionally detached man. One who regretted abandoning his family, yet was too proud or too damaged to reconnect directly. Instead, he had constructed an elaborate inheritance structure that would allow him to provide for me while testing my worthiness from beyond the grave. "Your father was a complex man who believed character was revealed through choices made when people thought no one was watching," Jonathan Pierce had explained earlier. "He spent decades observing how you lived. He was impressed by what he saw." I thought about the past 5 years since my divorce. The humiliation of Sterling leaving me for a younger woman. The slow erosion of my relationship with my children. The financial strain and social isolation that had come to define my daily life. During those years, I had continued volunteering at the food bank every Tuesday, not because I felt particularly virtuous, but because seeing people with less than I had reminded me that my problems were survivable. I tutored children at the library because I enjoyed teaching, not because I believed anyone was documenting my generosity. I had maintained my dignity throughout the divorce proceedings, refusing to fight dirty or weaponize the children, not because I was performing for some invisible audience, but because that kind of behavior felt beneath me. According to Archibald Thornfield's assessment, those choices had revealed character traits worth $340 million. My phone rang at exactly 9 p.m. "Sterling. Just wanted to check on you. The kids were worried about you spending Christmas alone." "The kids were worried," I repeated silently, noting that his concern was filtered and likely borrowed. "Well, we all were," he added quickly. "Blair specifically asked me to call and make sure you were doing all right." Blair had asked him to call. The woman who had replaced me was now managing Sterling's minimal obligations to his ex-wife. "I'm fine, Sterling. Enjoying a quiet holiday at home." Good. Listen, the kids want to take you to dinner when we get back. Maybe that new Italian place you like. A post-vacation guilt dinner. A moderately priced restaurant designed to soothe their consciences for abandoning me on Christmas. That sounds lovely, I said. When are you planning to return? New Year's Day. We're staying through New Year's Eve. Apparently there's an amazing party at the resort. Another week of luxury while their abandoned mother continued her solitary existence. Well, have a wonderful time. Tell everyone I said hello. I will. And thanks for being understanding about the whole Aspen thing. It means a lot that you're not making this complicated for the kids. Understanding. As if my exclusion from family Christmas had been a reasonable compromise rather than a deliberate rejection. Of course, Sterling. Enjoy your vacation. After I hung up, I sat alone in my living room, holding $5 million worth of financial freedom, and thinking about character tests, patient capital, and the difference between revenge and justice. My family believed they had left behind a boring, financially struggling woman who would gratefully accept whatever scraps of attention they offered upon their return. They had no idea they'd abandoned a woman who now possessed enough wealth to buy their entire lifestyle 10 times over. And thanks to Archibald Thornfield's strategic planning, I had time to decide exactly how and whether to use that knowledge. 3 days after my family's departure, I was sitting in the offices of Goldman Lux, learning the practical realities of being extraordinarily wealthy. Jonathan Pierce had arranged meetings with financial planners, tax attorneys, and what they referred to as lifestyle consultants, people whose job, apparently, was to help newly rich individuals avoid catastrophic mistakes. Mrs. Carmichael, Catherine Walsh began, a wealth counselor who specialized in what she called inheritance psychology. The most common error we see among inheritance recipients is immediate, dramatic lifestyle change. What kind of change? I asked. Luxury cars, oversized homes, extravagant gifts, designer wardrobes. Highly visible displays of wealth that signal to everyone around you that your circumstances have fundamentally shifted. And what's wrong with that? Nothing, if that's what you genuinely want. But most clients discover that sudden lifestyle inflation creates more problems than pleasure. Family members treat you differently. Friends develop expectations. And you become a target for people who see wealth as a resource rather than a relationship. I thought of Sterling and Blair's carefully curated Aspen posts, wealth displayed like proof of worthiness. What would you recommend instead? Gradual integration, strategic philanthropy aligned with your values, and careful observation. Watch how people respond to subtle changes before making any major revelations. You mean testing people's motives before they know I have money to offer them? Precisely. Your father designed the inheritance structure to give you that opportunity. She opened a portfolio of case studies. This woman inherited $80 million at 72. She spent 6 months quietly observing her family before revealing anything. What she discovered prompted her to restructure her will and dramatically reduce inheritances for children who had treated her poorly. She flipped a page. And this client inherited $150 million at 68. He tested his adult children by pretending he needed financial assistance. 3 of the 4 suggested he sell his home and move into assisted living rather than offering personal support. Only 1 offered emotional and practical help. The results, Catherine said softly, were illuminating. The inheritance distribution reflected those revealed priorities. The pattern was becoming clear. Sudden wealth created opportunities for character assessment that couldn't be achieved any other way. Mrs. Carmichael, Catherine said gently, may I ask about your current family dynamics? How would you describe your relationships with your children? I exhaled. Distant since my divorce 5 years ago. They maintain minimal contact and seem to view me as an obligation, rather than someone whose company they actually enjoy. Their father's relationship with them is much closer, especially since he began including them in luxury vacations and expensive entertainment with his new girlfriend. So their attention and affection currently correlate with his ability to provide upscale experiences. Catherine made notes in my file before continuing. That pattern suggests your children have learned to associate love and family connection with financial generosity, rather than emotional availability. Which means revealing your inheritance might temporarily improve their attentiveness, but it would be impossible to determine whether that improvement represented genuine affection or calculated interest in your money. So you're recommending that I test their character before revealing my inheritance? I asked. I'm recommending that you gather information about their authentic feelings before introducing variables that might contaminate their responses. That afternoon, I drove past Sterling's house. The house where I'd lived for 22 years before Blair's redecorating had erased all evidence of my existence. The Christmas decorations I'd chosen and arranged for decades had been replaced by professional holiday styling that looked expensive but soulless. I parked across the street and called Quentin, my eldest. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice carrying the distracted tone he used when he considered me an interruption. Hi, Mom. What's up? We're getting ready for dinner at this amazing restaurant, he added quickly. I just wanted to hear about your vacation, I said. Are you having a wonderful time? It's incredible. This resort is like nothing I've ever experienced. The spa, the restaurants, the skiing conditions. Dad really went all out this year. I'm so glad you're enjoying yourselves. Yeah, and Blair has been amazing. She's so much fun. And she really knows how to plan activities that everyone enjoys. She even arranged for a private ski instructor for Sarah. Blair was amazing. Blair knew how to plan activities everyone enjoyed. The subtext was unmistakable. Unlike his boring mother, who couldn't ski and would have dampened their expensive fun. That sounds wonderful, Quentin, I said evenly. I hope you'll tell me all about it when you get home. Sure, Mom. Listen, I need to go. We're running late for our reservation. Of course, sweetheart. Enjoy your dinner. After hanging up, I sat in my car across from my former home and made a decision that felt both calculated and necessary. When my family returned from their vacation, I was going to conduct my own character assessment before revealing anything about my changed circumstances. If my children were capable of loving me for who I was rather than what I could provide, I needed to know that before money complicated every interaction for the rest of our lives. That evening, I began planning what Catherine Walsh would probably call controlled testing scenarios, situations designed to reveal authentic behavior and priorities. My phone buzzed with another Instagram post from Peyton. A group photo of my family at what appeared to be the resort's most expensive restaurant. Everyone looked prosperous and happy. The caption read, "Perfect family dinner. Life is good when you're surrounded by people who share your values. #FamilyBlessed, #LivingWell. People who shared their values that apparently included excluding elderly. Mothers who couldn't afford luxury vacations or keep up with active lifestyle demands. I screenshot the photo and saved it to a folder I'd created called Evidence. By the time my family returned from Aspen, I intended to have a clear understanding of exactly how they viewed me and our relationships. Then I'd decide whether they deserved to know that the boring, financially struggling mother they'd abandoned for Christmas had inherited enough money to fund their luxury lifestyle preferences for the next several centuries. Some people use wealth to buy affection from family members who've been neglecting them. I was planning to use wealth to determine whether my family was capable of genuine affection, before deciding if they deserved access to resources that could change all our lives forever. The difference between those approaches, I was beginning to understand, would determine whether money healed or destroyed whatever remained of our relationships. And thanks to Archibald Thornfield's patient capital philosophy, I had time to make that assessment carefully and strategically rather than emotionally and impulsively. My father had spent 65 years studying my character from a distance. Now it was my turn to study my children's character from a position of hidden strength. New Year's Day arrived with my family's return from Aspen and a text from Sloan. Back from amazing trip. Can we do dinner this week? Want to tell you all about it. The exclamation points felt performative, like enthusiasm she thought she was supposed to display toward her mother, after abandoning her for an entire week. I spent the morning preparing for what Catherine Walsh had called controlled observation opportunities. Interactions designed to reveal authentic behavior when people didn't know they were being assessed. My first experiment would be simple. I decided to test my children's willingness to spend time with me when no luxury entertainment was involved. I texted Sloan. I'd love to have dinner. Would you like to come here? I could make your favorite pot roast. The response took 3 hours. Actually, Mom, we were thinking more like going out somewhere. Maybe that Italian place Dad mentioned. It would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. Translation. Less time-consuming than a home-cooked meal that required actual conversation and sustained attention to their mother's company. I arranged dinner at Morello's, a moderately priced restaurant that served decent Italian food, but wasn't expensive enough to suggest I'd come into money. On Tuesday evening, I arrived early and watched my 3 children enter together, looking tanned and relaxed from their expensive vacation. "Mom, you look..." Quentin paused, apparently searching for a compliment that wouldn't be entirely false. "You look rested." "Thank you, dear. You all look wonderful. Very healthy and happy." "The mountain air and exercise were incredible," Peyton said, settling into his chair and immediately checking his phone. "I've never felt more energetic. There's nothing like an active vacation to reset your entire system." "And the resort was just magical," Sloan added. "The spa treatments, the gourmet restaurants, the activities, every detail was perfect." "It sounds like you had an amazing time. I want to hear all about it." For the next hour, my children regaled me with detailed descriptions of their luxury vacation. The private ski lessons, the 5-star meals, the spa treatments, the New Year's Eve party that apparently cost more per person than I spent on groceries in 3 months. "Blair was so thoughtful about planning activities everyone would enjoy," Quentin explained. "She really understands how to create memorable experiences. She's remarkably sophisticated about travel and hospitality." Peyton agreed. "Dad's lucky to have found someone who shares his appreciation for quality experiences." Quality experiences. The phrase stung because it implied that experiences with me, their actual mother, lacked quality by comparison. "And how is your father doing?" I asked, noting that they'd mentioned Blair extensively but barely referenced Sterling. "Dad seems really happy," Sloan said carefully. "The relationship with Blair has been good for him. She encourages him to try new things and live more adventurously. Unlike his boring ex-wife, who had apparently encouraged him to live safely and predictably for 38 years. "I'm glad he's happy," I said. "And I'm glad you all enjoyed spending Christmas together." "Mom, we hope you understand why we couldn't include you this year," Quentin said, using the careful tone of someone delivering a rehearsed justification. "The activities were really demanding and honestly, it might have been awkward with Blair there." "I understand completely. Maybe next year we could plan something more inclusive," Sloan offered. "Like a beach vacation where everyone could relax together. A beach vacation where the elderly divorced mother could sit quietly while her family enjoyed activities that didn't require her active participation." "That sounds lovely, dear." As dinner continued, I noticed patterns that had probably existed for years but that I was now observing with the systematic attention wealth counselors called behavioral assessment. My children talked extensively about their own experiences and achievements but asked no questions about my life, interests, or feelings. They mentioned future plans that didn't include me and referenced shared experiences with their father and Blair, as if those relationships were more significant than our family history. Most revealing was their casual assumption that I would be grateful for whatever minimal attention they offered, regardless of how it was scheduled around. Their other priorities. "Mom, we should do this more often," Peyton said as we prepared to leave. "It's nice to catch up." "I agree. How often were you thinking?" "Oh, regularly when schedules allow." "When schedules allow. Not when they missed their mother or wanted to spend time with me. But when they're busy, important lives had occasional gaps that could accommodate their abandoned parent." "Of course. I'm always available." "We know, Mom," Sloan said, hugging me with the quick, perfunctory affection she might show a distant relative. "That's what's so great about you. You're always there when we need you. When they needed me, not when I needed them but when I could serve some purpose in their lives." Driving home, I felt both heartbroken and validated. The character assessment Catherine Walsh had recommended was revealing exactly what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. My children saw me as a resource rather than a relationship. They loved me in the abstract way people love family members they feel obligated to maintain contact with, but they didn't actually enjoy my company or prioritize my emotional welfare. The next morning I began phase 2 of my character assessment, testing their willingness to provide support during what they would perceive as a family crisis. I called Quentin first, adopting the worried tone I perfected during 43 years of motherhood. "Quentin, I need to talk to someone about a situation that's been developing, and I'm not sure how to handle it." "What's wrong, Mom?" "I've been having some financial difficulties since the divorce, and they're getting worse instead of better. The house needs major repairs that I can't afford, and my medical expenses have increased significantly. Oh, well, that's challenging. Have you talked to Dad about adjusting the divorce settlement? Your father has his own financial obligations now with Blair and their lifestyle. I don't want to create problems for him. Right. Well, have you looked into government assistance programs? Or maybe downsizing to something more manageable? Downsizing. Maybe sell the house and move into a senior community or something. Those places handle maintenance and often include medical services. It might be more practical for your situation. My oldest son, who had just spent a week at a luxury resort, was suggesting that his financially struggling mother sell her home and move into assisted living rather than offering any personal assistance or emotional support. I see. Thank you for the suggestion, Quentin. Sure, Mom. I hope you figure something out. Let me know if you need help researching facilities or anything. Help researching facilities. Not help with the actual problems, just help finding institutional solutions that would remove me from being his responsibility. I called Peyton next, testing whether he'd respond differently to news of my financial struggles. That's tough, Mom, he said after I explained the same fictional crisis. Have you considered getting a reverse mortgage? That would give you access to the house equity without monthly payments. A reverse mortgage? I repeated. Yeah, it's perfect for people in your situation. You could stay in the house but get cash for expenses. Of course, it would reduce the inheritance value eventually, but given your financial situation, that might be necessary. Reduce the inheritance value. My middle son was already calculating how my financial difficulties might impact his eventual inheritance. I'll look into that option, Peyton, I said. Great. And Mom, maybe this is a good time to think about simplifying your lifestyle overall. You probably don't need all that space anyway. When I called Sloan with the same story, her response was perhaps the most revealing. Mom, this is exactly what I was worried about when Dad left. Single women your age really struggle financially. And honestly, you probably should have been more prepared for this situation. More prepared how? I asked. Career-wise, investment-wise, just generally more independent. But that's water under the bridge. Now the important thing is finding practical solutions. Do you have suggestions for practical solutions? Well, you could probably get a part-time job to supplement your income. Lots of retail places hire seniors for customer service positions. And definitely look into senior housing. It's much more affordable and age-appropriate than trying to maintain a whole house. My daughter was suggesting that her 67-year-old mother get a retail job to make ends meet rather than offering any family support or assistance. Some character assessments reveal disappointing truths about people you'd hoped would demonstrate love and loyalty. My own assessment revealed that my children viewed me as an aging inconvenience, someone whose problems required institutional or employment solutions rather than family support. And now I had to decide whether that knowledge changed how I wanted to use $340 million to shape the remaining relationships in my life. 2 weeks after discovering my children's true feelings about my supposed financial crisis, I was sitting in Catherine Walsh's office, reviewing what she called my behavioral assessment findings with the clinical detachment I developed during 40 years of nursing practice. The results are quite consistent, Catherine observed, reading through the notes I'd compiled about each conversation. All 3 children immediately suggested institutional or employment solutions, rather than offering personal assistance or emotional support. The significance of that pattern is important. What does it suggest? I asked. It suggests they view you as an independent entity responsible for solving your own problems, rather than as a family member whose welfare is partially their responsibility. Even when I'm their mother facing genuine hardship? Especially then. Willingness to provide family support during crisis situations is one of the strongest indicators of authentic emotional connection versus obligatory relationship maintenance. I thought about my children's immediate suggestions that I sell my home, get a retail job, or move to senior housing, rather than offering to help with repairs, medical expenses, or even emotional support during a stressful period. Catherine, I asked, what would normal family responses look like in this situation? Children who genuinely care about their mother's welfare would typically offer some combination of financial assistance, practical help with problems, emotional support during the crisis, and family consultation about solutions that preserve her dignity and independence. None of which my children offered. Correct. Instead, they offered advice designed to remove your problems from their sphere of concern and responsibility. Which suggests what about their feelings toward me? That they love you as a family obligation but don't feel emotionally invested in your well-being or happiness. The clinical assessment confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. My children maintained contact with me from duty rather than desire. They viewed my problems as inconveniences to be managed rather than family challenges requiring mutual support. Mrs. Carmichael, Catherine asked gently, how do you want to proceed with this information? I want to make one final test before revealing my inheritance. What kind of test? I want to see how they respond when I ask for something that would require them to sacrifice time, convenience, or resources for my benefit. Catherine nodded approvingly. Escalation testing. If they won't provide support during a financial crisis, will they provide assistance when you need personal help or family involvement? Exactly. That afternoon, I called each of my children to request what most families would consider normal intergenerational support. Quentin, I'm feeling overwhelmed by everything that's been happening lately, and I was wondering if you could help me with some household projects this weekend. The gutters need cleaning, and there are some heavy boxes in the attic that I can't manage alone. This weekend, Mom? That's really bad timing. We have plans with Blair's family on Saturday, and Sunday I'm playing golf with Dad and some clients. What about the following weekend? I'd have to check my schedule. You know, Mom, you might want to hire a handyman service for that kind of work. It's probably safer than having family members on ladders and in attics. Hire a handyman service rather than spending a few hours helping his elderly mother. My successful engineer son was suggesting I pay professionals to handle tasks that families typically share. I understand, Quentin. I'll look into service options. Great. And Mom, you should really think about preventive maintenance contracts for the house. That way you won't have these emergency situations. My conversation with Peyton followed a similar pattern. Mom, manual labor really isn't my thing. Have you considered joining one of those senior community groups? They often have members who help each other with household projects. So rather than helping me yourself, you're suggesting I find other senior citizens to assist with tasks you consider too inconvenient? It's not about convenience, Mom. It's about practical solutions. You need regular help with home maintenance, and I'm not available for that kind of ongoing commitment. I'm not asking for ongoing commitment, Peyton. I'm asking for a few hours of help this weekend. Right. But this weekend leads to next weekend. And pretty soon I'm spending every weekend maintaining your house instead of living my own life. Living his own life. Helping his mother occasionally would interfere with his personal priorities. Sloane's response was perhaps the most revealing of all. Mom, I love you, but I'm really not comfortable with heavy lifting or ladder work. Have you thought about moving somewhere that doesn't require so much maintenance? A nice condo or senior community where landscaping and repairs are handled by management. I'm not ready to leave my home, Sloane. But Mom, practically speaking, you can't maintain a whole house by yourself. Maybe it's time to accept that your housing needs have changed. My housing needs haven't changed. My family support has changed. That's not fair, Mom. We all have our own lives and responsibilities. We can't be expected to maintain your house indefinitely. I'm not asking for indefinite maintenance, Sloane. I'm asking for help with specific projects that would take a few hours. I understand, but that's just not realistic given everyone's schedules and obligations. Everyone's schedules and obligations. My children had time for luxury vacations with their father, golf games with clients, and social events with Blair's family, but no time to help their mother with basic household needs. That evening, I made my final assessment call. This time, I requested emotional rather than practical support. Quentin, I've been feeling quite lonely since your father and I divorced, especially during the holidays, when everyone was in Aspen. Would you be interested in spending some regular time together? Maybe dinner once a week? Or attending community events together? Mom, weekly dinners aren't really practical. Our schedules are pretty packed, and honestly Blair plans a lot of our social activities now. What about monthly dinners? We could probably manage something monthly, though it might be easier to meet you at restaurants rather than doing home-cooked meals. That way it's less time-consuming for everyone. Less time-consuming for everyone. Spending time with his mother had become a time management problem, rather than a relationship opportunity. And community events. I don't really see us attending community events together, Mom. Our social circles are pretty different now. Our social circles were different because his now included his father's girlfriend and her affluent friends. Mine consisted of other divorced women, an age group his peers considered socially irrelevant. When I made similar requests to Peyton and Sloan, their responses confirmed the pattern. They were willing to maintain minimal contact with me, as long as it didn't interfere with their preferred lifestyles or social obligations. We love you, Mom, Sloan explained, but we need boundaries about how much time and energy we can invest in family obligations. Family obligations. That's what I had become to my children, an obligation to be managed efficiently rather than a relationship to be nurtured. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen with documents worth $340 million spread across the table, and tried to decide what to do with the knowledge that my children viewed me as a burden rather than a blessing. Some parents discover their adult children's true feelings gradually, over years of small disappointments and declining attention. I discovered my children's authentic priorities through systematic testing that revealed they had no interest in supporting, helping, or spending time with their mother, unless it aligned with their convenience and social preferences. Now I had to decide whether unlimited financial resources could change their feelings, or whether money would simply make their calculated attention more elaborate and ultimately more painful. The character assessment phase was complete. Tomorrow I would begin deciding how to use the results. 3 weeks after completing my character assessment, I was ready to implement what Catherine Walsh had termed strategic revelation, a carefully planned disclosure of my inheritance designed to test my children's final responses before making permanent decisions about our relationships and their financial futures. I arranged a family dinner at Morello's for the following Saturday, using the same casual tone that had characterized all my recent interactions with Quentin, Peyton, and Sloan. Just thought it would be nice to get together again. I told each of them, I have some news to share, and I'd prefer to tell everyone at the same time. The word news generated immediate curiosity. Quentin called back within an hour. Mom, what kind of news? Is everything all right with your health? Everything's fine, dear. I'll explain everything on Saturday. But you can't just say you have news and then not elaborate. What's going on? It's nothing to worry about, Quentin. Just some developments in my personal situation that I want to discuss with all of you together. Personal situation? His voice tightened. Mom, you're making me nervous. Are you sick? Are you having more financial problems? The concern in his voice was genuine, but I noticed it focused entirely on potential problems rather than positive possibilities. My children had learned to expect bad news from their mother. Never good. Saturday evening arrived with my 3 children seated around the table at Morello's, looking expectant and slightly anxious. I dressed more carefully than usual, not expensively, but with attention to details that suggested something significant was happening. Mom, you look nice tonight, Sloan observed. Is this about dating? Are you seeing someone? Not dating, dear, but thank you for noticing. So what's the big news? Peyton asked, checking his phone with the impatience he typically displayed when forced to focus on family conversations. I've come into some money, I said simply. Silence followed as my children processed the unexpected information. Money? Quentin repeated. What kind of money? Did you win the lottery? An inheritance from my father. But Grandpa died when you were 2, Sloan said, frowning. That's what we always believed. So did I replied. But apparently my father didn't die. He abandoned my mother and me, and he lived until 3 months ago. I explained Archibald Thornfield's story in the same matter-of-fact tone I had once used to discuss medical conditions with patients' families. The abandonment, the surveillance, the venture capital empire, the inheritance structure designed to test my character before providing financial security. How much money are we talking about? Peyton asked, leaning forward with sudden, intense attention. $340 million. The silence that followed was profound and revealing. My children stared at me, their expressions cycling rapidly through disbelief, excitement, calculation, and what appeared to be an immediate reassessment of our family dynamics. $340 million? Quentin repeated slowly. You're saying you're worth more than $300 million? I'm saying I've inherited resources that will change my life significantly. Mom, that's incredible, Sloane exclaimed, her enthusiasm more animated than any response she'd shown toward me in years. We need to celebrate. This is amazing news. When did you find out? How long have you known about this? Peyton demanded. I learned about it on Christmas night, while you were all in Aspen. Christmas. Quentin's voice rose with open outrage. You've known for a month that you inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, and you didn't tell us? I wanted time to process the information and understand what it meant for my future. But Mom, this affects all of us, Sloane protested. This is family news. We should have been involved in discussions about something this significant. How does my inheritance affect you? My question created another revealing silence. As my children realized, they had immediately assumed my good fortune would automatically benefit them. Well, obviously we want to help you manage resources this substantial, Peyton said carefully. This kind of wealth requires professional planning and family consultation. Family consultation about what specifically? Investment strategies, estate planning, philanthropy decisions, Quentin listed. You can't just make random choices about hundreds of millions of dollars without considering the implications for everyone. What implications for everyone? Mom, you're being deliberately obtuse, Sloane said irritably. Obviously, this inheritance changes everything about our family's financial future. We need to work together to make smart decisions about wealth management and distribution. Distribution? Within 10 minutes of learning about my inheritance, my daughter was discussing how the money should be distributed among family members. I've actually been working with wealth management professionals for several weeks, I said. They've helped me understand my options and responsibilities. What kind of options? Quentin asked. How to use resources wisely for personal fulfillment, charitable giving, and family considerations. Family considerations, Peyton repeated. What decisions have you made about family considerations? I'm still evaluating that aspect of my situation. Mom, we need to be involved in those evaluations, Sloane insisted. This isn't just your money. It's family wealth that will impact generations. Actually, it is just my money. The inheritance is entirely in my name, with complete discretionary control over all decisions. But you'll want to establish trusts for your children, Quentin said confidently. Estate planning at this level always involves family trusts and inheritance structures. Will I want to establish trusts for my children? Of course you will, Mom. This is generational wealth. You'll want to ensure your children and grandchildren are provided for. What makes you assume I'll want to do that? The discomfort was immediate and visible as my children realized their expectations might not align with my intentions. Because that's what families do, Peyton said, his voice edged with concern. Parents provide for their children when they have resources to share. Do they? What about when children provide for their parents when they have resources to share? What do you mean? I mean that for the past month, I've been testing your willingness to provide support, assistance, and attention to your mother during what you believed was a period of financial hardship and emotional need. Testing us. Sloane's voice rose with indignation. You were testing us? I was evaluating whether my children were capable of loving and supporting me as a person, or whether your attention was conditional on what I could provide for you. That's manipulative and unfair, Quentin protested. Is it? Is it more manipulative than immediately assuming my inheritance should be shared with children who couldn't find time to help me clean gutters or eat weekly dinners together? Those situations are completely different, Peyton argued. How are they different? Because family wealth is different from personal favors and social obligations. So you view helping your mother with household projects as personal favors, but you view sharing her inheritance as a family obligation. My children exchanged glances, recognizing how clearly their responses revealed the very attitudes I had been assessing. Mom, what exactly are you saying about our inheritance? Sloane asked carefully. I'm saying that I haven't made any decisions about distributing resources to children whose interest in my welfare appears to correlate directly with their perception of what I can offer them. Some family meetings end with hugs, shared excitement, and celebration of good fortune. Ours ended with my children realizing that their mother's sudden wealth might not automatically translate into improved circumstances for them, and that their responses to both poverty and prosperity had been carefully documented as evidence of their true priorities. The character assessment was complete. The results were about to determine whether my inheritance would bridge the gap between my children and me, or widen it permanently. The 3 days following my inheritance revelation were marked by a sudden surge of attention from my children that felt both predictable and nauseating. My phone rang constantly with calls from Quentin, Peyton, and Sloan, each approaching my newfound wealth with different strategies, but identical underlying motivations. Quentin called first, adopting the professional tone he used in business negotiations. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation on Saturday, and I realize I may have seemed presumptuous about the inheritance. I want you to know that whatever decisions you make, I support completely." "Thank you, Quentin. That said, I'd love to help you navigate the complex financial planning aspects of managing this kind of wealth. My engineering background gives me strong analytical skills for evaluating investment opportunities and risk assessment." "I see. And obviously, I want to spend more time together so we can rebuild our relationship properly. I realize I may have been neglecting our family connection, and I want to correct that moving forward." The sudden desire to rebuild our family connection was transparently linked to my financial status, but I responded with polite acknowledgement rather than calling attention to the obvious correlation. "I'd enjoy spending more time together, Quentin." "Great. I was thinking we could start with weekly dinners, maybe alternating between home-cooked meals and nice restaurants. And I'd love to help with those household projects you mentioned. Cleaning gutters, organizing the attic, whatever you need." Weekly dinners and household help that had been inconvenient obligations a week earlier were now opportunities for relationship building that might lead to financial benefit. Peyton's approach was more directly transactional. "Mom, I want to apologize if I seemed dismissive about your financial concerns recently. I was dealing with some work stress that made me less available than I should have been for family support." Work stress he had never mentioned before, but which now conveniently explained his reluctance to help his supposedly struggling mother. "I understand, Peyton. Moving forward, I want to be much more involved in your life. In fact, I've been researching wealth management firms and financial planning strategies tailored to high-net-worth individuals. I could arrange meetings with some of the most respected professionals in the field. I already have wealth management assistants, dear." "Right. But you'll want multiple opinions before making major decisions. This level of money requires specialized expertise and family consultation." "What kind of family consultation?" "Well, investment strategies should account for the next generation's needs and long-term goals. And tax planning becomes significantly more complex at this wealth level. You'll need trusts and estate structures that protect assets for your heirs." "My heirs?" Peyton had already begun positioning himself and his siblings as inevitable beneficiaries of wealth they'd shown no interest in when they believed I was struggling financially. Sloane's approach, however, was the most emotionally calculated. "Mom, I feel awful about how distant our relationship has become since the divorce," she said softly. "I've been so focused on my own life. I haven't been the daughter you deserve." "What's prompted this realization, Sloane?" "Honestly." She hesitated just long enough to seem sincere. "Learning about your inheritance made me think about how little time we might have left together, and how I've taken our relationship for granted." "My inheritance made you think about our limited time together." "Well, yes. I mean, knowing you now have the resources for travel and experiences, it made me realize we should be sharing those opportunities. Building memories together. Sharing opportunities and building memories funded by my financial resources, rather than genuine interest in my company." "I'd like that, Sloane." "Wonderful. I've already started researching mother-daughter trips we could take. Europe, Asia luxury cruises. We could have such incredible experiences." "Incredible experiences purchased with my inheritance, rather." Weekly dinners and household help that had been inconvenient obligations a week earlier were now opportunities for relationship building that might lead to financial benefit. Peyton's approach was more directly transactional. "Mom, I want to apologize if I seemed dismissive about your financial concerns recently. I was dealing with some work stress that made me less available than I should have been for family support." Work stress he had never mentioned before, but which now conveniently explained his reluctance to help his supposedly struggling mother. I understand, Peyton. Moving forward, I want to be much more involved in your life. Disgusted, I admitted. The contrast between how they treated me when they thought I was struggling and how they treat me now tells me everything I need to know about their priorities. Have they explicitly requested money or inheritance guarantees? Not directly. They're framing it as family consultation, estate planning discussions that conveniently benefit them. Classic wealth relationship modification, Catherine said calmly. They're attempting to establish themselves as deserving beneficiaries through visible attention and involvement. Support they were unwilling to provide when they believed I needed help instead of having money to offer. Exactly. How would you like to respond? I want to give them one final opportunity to demonstrate whether their interest is genuine or strategic. How do you plan to do that? By being completely transparent about my actual inheritance plans, and then observing their reactions once they understand that my wealth doesn't automatically translate into generosity toward children who neglected me when they thought I was poor. That's a sophisticated test, she said. Are you prepared for anger? Resentment? Accusations of selfishness? I'm prepared to discover that my children's feelings toward me may be entirely conditional, based not on who I am, but on what I can provide. And if that turns out to be true, then I'll use my wealth to build relationships with people who value me for reasons that have nothing to do with money. And my children would learn that some opportunities for love and generosity can't be recovered once they've been squandered. Some parents use wealth to buy affection from children who neglected them. I plan to use wealth to teach my children that authentic relationships can't be purchased retroactively, and that love offered only after discovering someone's financial value isn't love at all. The final test would determine whether my inheritance could heal our family relationships, or confirm that they had been irreparably damaged by my children's inability to value their mother as anything more than a potential source of financial benefit. Saturday evening arrived with all three of my children gathered in my modest dining room for the first time since before Sterling and I divorced. They brought flowers, expensive wine, and the kind of animated enthusiasm usually reserved for job interviews or first dates with highly desirable prospects. Mom, this pot roast is incredible, Peyton announced, taking a second helping of the same recipe he'd politely declined for years. I'd forgotten what amazing home cooking tastes like. You should cook for us more often, Sloan added. There's something so special about family dinners in the house where we grew up. The house where they'd grown up, but had rarely visited since Sterling moved out and took their social aspirations with him. I'm glad you're enjoying dinner, I said calmly. I wanted us to have a comfortable setting for discussing my inheritance plans. The conversation shifted instantly. Forks were set down. Backs straightened. My children leaned forward with the synchronized focus of people, expecting news that would significantly affect their financial futures. Mom, we've been thinking about everything you shared last weekend, Quentin began, his tone practiced. We want you to know that we support whatever decisions you make. What kinds of decisions are you expecting me to make? I asked. Well, estate planning, obviously, Peyton said. Setting up trusts for your children and grandchildren. Establishing charitable foundations. Maybe some family investment strategies. Charitable foundations, Sloan added quickly. You'll want to give away a significant portion for tax advantages and philanthropic impact, but also ensure your family is provided for first. What makes you think I'll want to provide for my family before making charitable commitments? I asked. Because that's what responsible parents do, Quentin replied, irritation slipping into his voice. You secure your children's futures first, then use remaining resources charitably. Do responsible children secure their parents' welfare first? I asked quietly, and then use remaining resources for their own enjoyment? The silence that followed was thick and revealing. They understood the parallel. They just didn't like it. Mom, those situations are completely different, Peyton protested. How so? We're talking about generational wealth that affects long-term family security, Sloan said. Not temporary household projects. And I was talking about immediate, practical needs that affected my short-term welfare and emotional security, I replied. It's not fair to compare them, Sloan insisted. One involves permanent financial decisions. The other involved minor inconveniences that could have been handled by hired services. So my need for family support was a minor inconvenience that could be outsourced, I said evenly. But your interest in my wealth represents major family considerations that require personal involvement. You're twisting our words, Quentin said defensively. We're trying to have a serious conversation about responsible wealth management. And I'm bringing up family priorities and relationship dynamics that my wealth advisors have identified as crucial factors in inheritance planning. Your wealth advisors think family relationships should influence financial decisions? Peyton asked, alarm flashing across his face. Absolutely. They've explained that how family members treat one another reveals character traits that should be considered when allocating resources. What kind of traits? Sloan demanded. Whether love and concern are authentic, I said, or conditional upon financial benefit. Mom, that's a terrible way to think about family, Quentin protested. Love and money should be separate. Are they? I asked. When you believed I was struggling financially, you suggested I get a retail job and move into senior housing rather than offering help. When you learned I had inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, you suddenly had time for weekly dinners and household projects. Those were different circumstances, Peyton said. How? Helping someone wealthy is different from enabling someone making poor financial choices. You thought my need for help with repairs represented poor financial choices, I said. And now that you know I can afford any lifestyle I choose, you're eager to help maintain it. We're trying to support you during a major life transition, Sloan said carefully. Where was that support during my divorce and financial uncertainty? Mom, we're trying to move forward, Quentin said tightly. And my advisors have explained that past behavior predicts future reliability. What does that mean for inheritance planning? Peyton asked. It means I've allocated resources based on demonstrated priorities. I pulled out the documents Catherine Walsh had helped prepare. I've established modest trust funds for each of you, I said. $50,000 each, accessible at age 65. $50,000? Quentin's voice cracked. Out of $340 million? That's approximately what you might have inherited had I lived modestly and saved carefully through retirement. But Mom, that's insulting, Peyton said. It doesn't reflect your wealth. Why is it an insult? Because it doesn't reflect the importance of family, Sloan snapped. What would reflect that importance? Substantial trusts, Quentin said. Primary beneficiaries. Based on what qualifications? Being your children. My children who couldn't help clean gutters, I replied. Who told me to get a retail job. Who found time for me only after learning I was wealthy. This is blackmail, Sloan accused. No, I said calmly. It's alignment. You're receiving exactly what you invested. Some inheritance discussions bring families together. Ours revealed entitlement where love should have been. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my suite at the Four Seasons in Prague, overlooking the Vltava River. I'd spent the month learning Czech cooking and volunteering at a children's hospital. The reaction to the inheritances had followed a predictable pattern. Anger, accusations, legal threats. You're destroying our family over money, Sloan had said. The inheritance isn't driving us apart, I replied. It's revealing that we were never truly together. Sterling even called, concerned about my instability. I reminded him that he left me for a younger woman and took the children skiing while I ate leftovers alone on Christmas. The legal threats vanished when competency evaluations were suggested. Now, 3 months after our final meeting, I was living authentically for the first time in decades. I sold the Cleveland house and donated the proceeds to a foundation supporting divorced women over 60. I founded Phoenix Rising Enterprises, helping women navigate financial independence after late-life divorce. Mrs. Carmichael, Dr. Elena Novak said one afternoon in Prague, the children want to know if you'll return for Maria's surgery. Absolutely, I said. I've extended my stay. But Mom, that's insulting, Peyton said. It doesn't reflect your wealth. Why is it an insult? Because it doesn't reflect the importance of family, Sloan snapped. What would reflect that importance? Substantial trusts, Quentin said. Primary beneficiaries. Based on what qualifications? Being your children. My children who couldn't help clean gutters, I replied. Who told me to get a retail job? Who found time for me only after learning I was wealthy? This is blackmail, Sloan accused. No, I said calmly. It's alignment. You're receiving exactly what you invested. Some inheritance discussions bring families together. Ours revealed entitlement where love should have been. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my suite at the Four Seasons in Prague, overlooking the Vltava River. I'd spent the month learning Czech cooking and volunteering at a children's hospital. The reaction to the inheritances had followed a predictable pattern. Anger, accusations, legal threats. You're destroying our family over money, Sloan had said. The inheritance isn't driving us apart, I replied. It's revealing that we were never truly together. Sterling even called, concerned about my instability. I reminded him that he left me for a younger woman and took the children skiing while I ate leftovers alone on Christmas. The legal threats vanished when competency evaluations were suggested. Now, 3 months after our final meeting, I was living authentically for the first time in decades. I sold the Cleveland house and donated the proceeds to a foundation supporting divorced women over 60. I founded Phoenix Rising Enterprises, helping women navigate financial independence after late-life divorce. Mrs. Carmichael, Dr. Elena Novak said one afternoon in Prague, the children want to know if you'll return for Maria's surgery. Absolutely, I said. I've extended my stay.